Hello there and welcome to another Partners in Crime tutorial. In this tutorial you'll learn how to make a cinematic intro with Blender. So if you'd like to not follow the tutorial and have a template of the tutorial result, you can support our channel by purchasing the project file in the description, but if you want to learn how to make this from scratch, then let's jump into Blender and get started. The first thing we want to do is, with Blender opened up, we want to clear up our default scene and set up our project. So let's delete this default cube by typing X and clicking delete. Then let's type numpad 7 on our keyboard and type Ctrl Alt and the numpad 0 to bring our camera into top view. And now we're just going to clear up these background elements. So type N on your keyboard, scroll through the panel until you see this display section, select it, and just deselect all of these values. Now you want to right click on this lamp here and type X and click delete to delete that, and we can collapse the panel by typing N. So we have a clear scene here, and we're going to add some text, and then we're going to give our text a nice metallic look. So let's type Shift A and click text, and let's type tab and edit the text. And just press tab once you're done. Now we're going to go into the text object data tab and we're going to center our text. And let's left click on this green arrow and just pull our text down. Alright, so now we're going to open a font that we have stored on our computer, and I'll include a download link to this font in the description. So select this folder here. And the font we'll use is called Railway. And we'll use the semi-bold version. So now we have that loaded in here. Let's heighten this on the screen a little bit. And now let's proceed with giving our text that metallic look. So let's go into the world background and make the background black. And give our text the material. So go into the material section, add a material, make it a shadeless material, and we're going to name this metal. And we're going to go into the textures section, and we're going to add a new texture and make it a blend texture. Let's pull this out here, and let's change the coordinates to generated and the coordinates to vertical. Now what we'll do is we'll bring a render box over our scene by typing Shift B in the viewport and just drag a box over some of our text. Go into render view, and now we can see how our gradient looks. So let's click the color section and check ramp. And let's click this here. Make sure this has full alpha. You can see we're starting to get a gradient at the bottom of our text. So let's just add in some color stops and start adjusting their positions. So let's bring this here, and we'll make this gradient stop black, and we'll change the position to 0.87. So you can see at the top of our text we get that darkness there. So let's put that back to 0.87, and let's put this stop 0.689, and we'll bring the value all the way up. So now we get a dark gradient from the top, and it gets really bright over in this section. Alright, and let's pull this stop to the side, and let's make this white as well, and we'll put the position to 0.616. So now we'll have a long black gradient. So we've got a long darkness that fades into a long bright area. We're just gonna adjust these until we get a nice, more metallic look. So it looks a little bit less like a gradient and a little bit more metallic. So let's select this stop here and we will drag the value for this down, and we will change the position. Let's see, 0.54. Okay, 0.542 is good. And let's put this here. Let's see. Let's change this position to 0.415. Pull this one back. You can see we're starting to get a little bit more of a metal look. So we're going to make the bright edges fade into some darkness as well. We're going to make it a little bit subtle by putting some grays along the way. So let's click this and let's go to the value. Let's make it 542. So this color stop here, and let's make the value, let's see, let's make the value something very low. Okay, and let's bump the brightness for this up actually, 1.6. The contrast to 1.6. Lower the brightness a bit so we can see the text better. This is just going to give us, let's reset the brightness. This is just going to give us a little bit more contrast to our text. We can change the interpolation from linear to B-spline. And yeah. Alright, so let's insert the rest of our color stops. So for this one, and we'll change the position to 0.361. See, we'll add another stop here. Put the position to 0.47. We'll make the value for this 0.073. Okay. So now we've got a pretty good metallic gradient for our text. Let's change the coordinates to object. And you can see that's starting to shape up nicely. So let's type Shift B and box select over the whole text and see how this gradient looks. And it's looking really nice. So now what we're going to do is we're going to name this metal. And we're going to hover our cursor in the viewport, and we're going to make sure our text is sort of just completely flat. So let's use my mouse button to pan around. So we're going to size it completely down on this axis, which would be the z-axis. So SZ0, and enter. And let's tighten up at 0 to go back in the camera view. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this text and create sort of a brighter outline to enhance the metallic look of it. So we're going to Shift D, and we're going to right click to cancel that movement. And we're going to type GZ minus 0.001, and we're going to type enter. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the text section. Well, actually we should go into the materials section first and make sure this has its own material. So click this F and click this plus, and go into the texture section, and what we'll do is we'll increase the contrast 3.6, and let's Control Z that. We'll also have to make sure it has its own texture, so click this F and this plus, increase the contrast to 3.8, we'll do 3.8. And we'll type G, move our text, so you can see that there. Right click to cancel the movement. And what we'll do now is we'll go into the text object data tab and increase the depth. And you can see we got some metal highlights here. So we've set up our text, and it's got a nice metal shading, and then we have our nice highlights. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in our particle effects, and then we're going to go into the compositor. So you can type Control Alt B to remove the render border and go into material view. And we're going to go into the render layers section and click this first layer here to make sure that the render layer selected here is also the first layer tab in our scene. And we're going to double click on this till we can edit the name, and we will call this layer our text layer. And we'll click this plus, click the second layer tab, and we're going to name this layer our particle layer, and we're going to use this to make those cinematic particles. Alright, so we have our text layer and our particle layer. We'll probably eventually add a background layer, but we'll stick to adding in our particles for now. So let's click the second layer tab. Let's type Shift S and cursor to center to make sure that we brought that back to our absolute center. And we'll type Shift A, curve, and circle. So this circle is going to be one of our particle objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in the circle. We're going to give it a material that's going to be nice and bright but semi-transparent. And then we're going to duplicate it over to create a couple of other particles. And then we'll create a particle system. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's add in a material for this. So go into the material section and add a new material. And we'll make it a shadeless material. And we'll check transparency. And let's go into the curve object data tab and click 2D. And that just fills in our circle. So now we'll type S, move our cursor down, and left click. And going back into the materials section, and let's actually go with some blue cinematic particles. We can change the color of this layer. So select this box here. We're gonna name it particle material. So now our material's name is particle material. We're gonna type Control G. I'm gonna name the group particle group. Alright, so now we'll type G, move this over here, left click, we'll type Shift D, left click, size it down so that we have some varying particle sizes. So left click to confirm that, click the F and the plus to separate that material, and we'll make this a white material. So we'll have a white particle, a blue particle. I think we should have a gray particle as well. So before we add the gray particle, let's give this a pass index. So this will just help us separate this in the compositor for later. So we'll give it a pass index of 5 now. So, and we'll scroll up, Shift D to duplicate this. I'll click cancel movement. Size this up slightly by typing S and moving your cursor out. Left click to confirm that and click plus. Separate the material once more. Make it gray, and we'll also change the pass index value so that it doesn't share the same pass index value with our white particle object. So change the pass index value to 6, and we've created our particles. Now the next thing we want to do is actually create our animated particles. So this is our particle group, and now we're going to create our particle emitter. But before we do that, let's change our scene settings to make it AV sync, so that just make sure that the frame rate, that the frames play at the proper rate in the viewport, and go into the render settings and change the frame rate to 60 frames per second so we get a nice smooth animation. So now we'll type Shift A, mesh and plane, and we will go into the modifier section and add a subdivision surface modifier and put the value up to 3. So now we've created a plane, but we subdivided it several times over so that we have several vertices for our particles to emit from. So let's type Z so you can see all of these faces, and in between these faces are the vertices, and that's just where our particles are going to come from. So let's hit apply on this modifier, type Z, get back into object mode. So if at any time you don't know what key I'm pressing, I have screencast keys at the bottom left hand here. So let's go into the material section actually first. Click new, and we'll just check transparency, and we'll bring this down a lot. And we'll go back into material view. So we have a semi-transparent particle emitter there. So we'll go into the particle section, add a new particle system, and we'll ignore all these settings for now, and we'll just get to the group, and we can select our particle group. Up the size a bit, check rotation, and you can see we've got our particles there. So let's play this along here. Now we want to go to fill weights and turn off gravity so that we don't have it falling off the screen there. So we kind of just have our particles just there. So what we want to do is we'll turn off the emitter geometry normal. We'll add in a force field that's gonna affect the physics of the particles. So let's actually want it to have a cinematic look. So we'll put the particles in the bottom left of the screen, have them kind of blowing out. So let's type G, move this here, left click, rewind, play this through. Alright, so let's add in some force fields. So first we'll add a wind force field, so we'll type Shift A, and we'll go to wind, and we'll type R, and then R once more on our keyboard, and you see where that arrow is pointing is the direction that the wind's going to go in. So we want it to point out this direction. So just move your cursor until you have the force field facing this direction, and just left click, type G, move this to the bottom left of the screen, and just left click that as well. And if we rewind and play this through, you can see we have particles blowing off the screen. I also want to go back to our particle emitter object and change the lifetime to something really long. And that'll just ensure that our particles stay on the screen for a long amount of time. So let's hit pause. Let's right click on this force field, type Shift D to duplicate it. Right click to cancel the movement, and we'll go into the force field settings, and we'll change the type from wind to turbulence now. So let's rewind, replace. We should have wind and turbulence. You can see that turbulent motion affecting it. What we want to do now is up the strength of the turbulence. So we got kind of a lot of shift in position there, but it's kind of floating in an awkward manner. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our force field sort of constantly rotate, so that our particles aren't having that weird sort of floating effect, and so that their movement is a little bit more turbulent. So what we'll do is rewind to the first frame in the animation, type on the keyboard, and click rotation. Actually, let's type Alt R, and we'll do I in rotation, and then fast forward along here. Let's see, and frame 69 we'll do RZ, RY, no, RZ. Alright, we'll do RZ 179 and enter. We'll type I and click rotation. So now from frame, let's see, from 0 to frame 169, we have that sort of constant rotation there. But what we want to do is we want to make it keep rotating. So what we'll do is split the screen, go into the outliner, or rather the graph editor, and channel extrapolation mode, linear extrapolation, rewind, play it, and we have our constantly rotating turbulence force field. So we could slow this down. Just type A again, and go into the dope sheet, and just type S, let's see, 3, and type enter. Right, so you can see our particles are coming out more. What we want to do is right click back on the wind force field. We're just going to keep adjusting the force field settings until we get a nice, desirable looking particle effect. So we'll also right click on the particle object itself and size it up a little bit. So type S and just move that up, left click, and We'll right click back on this force field, reduce the strength, and the look is starting to get a lot better. Alright, so with our particle emitter selected, which is our plane, you want to go into the particle section, and we're going to adjust some of these settings. Let's put the random size all the way up, so our particles are completely random in size, and that is starting to shape up very nicely. So if we hold down shift and click the first layer, you can see we have our particles and we have our text. And if we go into render view, we can see how each layer looks by going to the render layer section and just selecting each layer individually. Now, to be able to overlay our text layer onto the particle layer in the compositor, we're going to have to go back into solid view for now, and we're going to go into the render section and the shading area, and we're going to change the alpha from sky to transparent, and that should do it. So let's rewind, lead this through, and let's actually, with our particle emitter selected, let's actually go into our particles and we'll bake our particles so that they behave properly when we play back an animation. So let's rewind and play this, and that's looking pretty okay. You can tweak the particle movements later, but for now let's get these effects in the compositor. So let's go into the render layer section, and on the particle layer, you want to have the particle layer selected, and you want to make sure that it renders the material index, because that's what we use to separate the index values of these two particles. So this one has an index of 5, this one has an index of 6, and we'll remember that for when we get into the compositor. So F12 or F12 will just render image, and then you can jump into the compositor and get to it. So jump into the compositor, check these nodes, backdrop, and add a viewer node. Let's hook the render layer's output to the viewer node's input, and let's uncheck use alpha for now, and add color alpha over and hook it after the render layer's node. Select the render layer's node and duplicate it and change it to the particle layer, and now we have the particle layer behind our text layer. So we're gonna now engage in starting a whole bunch of fun effects with our particles. So we're going to completely sort of ignore the text layer for now, and we're going to add in some glows and some blurs to our particles. So let's add color mix and hook the output here and change it to an add node. So we basically added this image to itself, so that's why you get that brightness. So what we'll do is we'll click add filter layer, we'll add in a glowy version of the image to the original image. So make sure the glare node is hooked after the render layers node and into the bottom input of the add node here. And we'll click add filter blur, and we'll hook the blur up to the original image, make it fast Gaussian, and we'll blur it by 5 pixels on the X and Y values. So you can see we're getting a little bit of blur in our particles. Now what we really want to do is give it sort of a fake depth of field effect, and also kind of artificially scale up our particles in the compositor. So we're gonna first artificially scale those particles. Let's add color alpha over and hook it after the add node here. We'll click add distort scale, place this here, and just hook the output of the add node to the input of the scale node, the output of that to the input of the bottom input. Make sure it's the bottom input of the alpha over node, and we'll scale to 1.5. Alright, so let's scale it up to 3. What we'll do now is we'll blur it up. So add filter blur, and we'll make it a fast Gaussian blur, and we'll blur it up by about 15. This just gives us some nice blurry zoomed in particles. We're going to keep tweaking the looks of these, but it's starting to get a nice look. So let's see how it looks if we put the blurred particles behind the non-blurred particles. And let's just leave them in front. And we'll adjust the value. So add color, do saturation value, and place it after the blur. Put the value down. And let's only make certain particles glow. And that's what the path index, the material path index, is going to really help us with. So what we're going to do is we're going to click add converter ID mask, and this is basically where we enter the value of the number that we put in the particle, or one of the particles that we've added in an index value to. So we have an index value of 5 on our white particle object. So we enter the value 5 here, and we plug this into the ID value, and then we plug this into the glare node, and that will make anything within ID value of 5 glow. So our blue particles won't glow, but our white particles will. So I really liked having the blue particles glow. So what we'll do is we'll leave this as is. And we'll use this to help with the masking of the white particles. So let's see where we'll use the ID mask. So our blue particles are glowing a lot, and what we don't want to glow really are these gray particles. So we'll put the threshold up on the glow, and we'll save this pass index for a later date. Alright, so it's starting to look a lot more fine now. So at this point, we can actually lower the size of the particles. Let's see. Let's right click on this gray particle here, and let's actually make it a dark blue. Alright, and let's right click on this particles, and let's lower the size. And I'll click render image. Alright, it's starting to look a lot more polished. Alright, so now we can bring in an alpha overnode. So with this one selected, we'll type Shift D, place this here, and make sure we have the composite node hooked up here. And we'll place this into the bottom input of the alpha overnode, and we'll just leave this off to the side in case we use it later. So now we have our node set up here. So you want to make sure you have all the values here, and you want to make sure you have everything hooked as shown. Once you're done making sure that your scene settings are proper, we can then add in a nice background to our scene, and we'll add in some nice depth of field. So let's go with the depth of field. So let's click add matte ellipse mask, increase the width and the height. And what we'll do is we'll use this mask to mix our regular scene here with a more scaled, blurry version of it. And it's just going to make the edges more blurry and scaled, and that's going to give the illusion of some depth and give it a nice cinematic feel. So let's click add color mix, hook it to the alpha overnode, hook the ellipse mask to the factor input of the mix node, and we'll hook the alpha overnode also to the bottom input here. Alright, so what we'll do now is we'll have to scale up a version of our scene. So we'll have to add a scaling node. So click add distort scale. And let's hook this here. So I'm going to hook it to the output that's hooked to the top input in the mix node. I'm going to scale this up and do 1.2 and 1.2. So now you should see some scaling happen on the outer edges. So one thing is our ellipse mask isn't blurred, so you have these hard edges. So you want to have a kind of cinematic fade to it. So let's click add filter blur. Let's blur up the ellipse mask. Let's do 150 for now. And if we increase the resolution, the render settings to 100%, you would want to increase the X and Y values of these to 300. So now we've mixed this with a more scaled version of our scene, but we also want the more scaled version of our scene to be blurred. So we'll shift our blur node and blur up the scaled version of our scene. Alright, so that's a lot of blur there. Let's try to do 30. Use the middle mouse button to pin around. Alright, so that looks good for now. Let's click on this and shift D this, duplicate it, right here. Now we're going to add a vignette. So if we go to the viewer node, right, what we'll want to do is pay attention to, or let's just left click on this and hold on to shift and left click on this, and shift D to duplicate this and hook this to the bottom input of the mix node and change the mix node to a multiply node. So now we'll have a vignette or some edge fading on our scene, and it'll look really cinematic. Now, one thing we really want to do is we want to get in a nice background for this. So let's go back into the default view and viewer node view, see how it looks, and it's shaping up pretty nicely. It's pretty good. We'll add in a background, maybe tweak our particles a bit. So let's go into 3D view and let's add in a background layer. So click this plus and click the third layer tab here. Click this third layer tab and we're going to shift A mesh plane and we're going to scale it up by 8. So type S8, enter. And we're going to go to the material section, scroll through here, add a new material, and add a new texture. We're going to go into the render view, shift B, and create a render box. And we'll go back into the material section, make sure you have shadeless checked, and go back to the texture section. Make sure it's a clouds texture. We'll make it a runway F2, F1. Well, let's just go with F1 and give it a ramp. Make the coordinates object coordinates. And we'll reduce the brightness of this and increase the alpha value here. We just want a nice cloudy looking background. So we want some subtle clouds there, and we're going to flip the ramp and we're going to increase the noise size, and this type should be this up here. So you can see we got a background here that's got a nice kind of cloudy look. Let's increase the depth 24 so we get more detail on that, and Control B, and let's go into the render layers. So we have a background layer, so we'll do BG and hold on shift and select our other layers, and we'll just hit F12 to render that. We'll jump into the compositor and we'll click add color alpha over, and we'll add our BG layer in. So you can see our background layer, and we want it to also have the vignette with the background layer. So let's just move this back there. Let's add a layout reroute, like this here. So let's put our reroute here. And we'll put the alpha over node here, image here. This is just going to help us organize this a little bit better. So you can see we've got the background in the background, and then we've got our vignette at the edge. And our scene's starting to shape up a lot. One thing that's starting to bother me a bit is the particles. So let's see. Let's see what we'll do with particles. Well, we could have a strong particle background, but what we'll do is we'll actually adjust the text so that it matches a little bit better with the particle background. So let's see. Let's actually add in an ellipse mask behind the text. So let's find the text layer, which is right here, and we're going to click on this ellipse mask, Shift D to duplicate it, and click on this blur, Shift D to duplicate that. We'll click on this alpha over, Shift D, set there, and so just make sure you hook the nodes as shown. And we're going to reduce the width and height of this ellipse mask. So we're just creating a bright area behind our text. And we're going to wait for this to composite, and that's what we're going for. So let's actually not use an alpha over node for this. Let's use an add node instead. So we're going to add it to what's below here. So let's click add, color, and mix, and hook it just before this alpha over node. Change it to an add node, and we'll hook the blur node to the add node, and click this ellipse mask here, and let's delete this alpha over node. So I'll click on that, and X to delete it, and let's click on this ellipse mask, reduce the width and the height. So we're just creating a small bright spot behind our text. Alright. So now what we can do is we can add, color, mix, and hook it to the blur node, change it to a color, and make it blue. And what we'll do so that we can add in the background to this more properly is we'll actually hook that back there, and we'll move the background all the way back here so that we're able to add in our blur to this background. So let's hook this to the bottom input of the alpha over, this to the bottom input of the add node. And now you can see we can add these effects a little bit better. So let's change this from an add to a, let's see, we'll make this, where's lighten? We'll see how lighten looks. Alright, so we'll just use, let's see, use screen and put the factor down. And put it down a little bit more, 0.01. Alright, what we'll do now is for the vignette, We have the multiply node on. Let's actually turn the multiply down a bit and increase the width and height of the vignette. So that's not too overpowering. And we can turn the multiply up now that we've increased the width and height. Alright, it's looking a little bit better. We can go into default view, go into the viewer node. You can see we got our textured background there, but let's go into 3D view. Now you can also give this an image texture, but what we'll actually do is go into the third layer here, and create our material. We'll name the material BG. Click the F and we'll delete it for now. We'll create a new material and we'll type Shift A, lamp, and we'll make it a point lamp. So we'll type Shift B again and bring this border box up and go back into render view. And what we'll do with the lamp is we'll turn up the energy and we'll type GZ, move it up and left click, and we'll go into the textures section and we'll add a new texture for this, and we'll make it, let's see, where's clouds. You just get a little bit more definition by using a lamp to emit the texture on there. And let's put the depth to 24 and check ramp. And let's see, go back to the texture section and we'll increase the contrast and put the size up to 1. And what we'll do is right click back on this plane from the material sections, and you can reduce the specular intensity and increase the diffuse intensity or decrease the diffuse intensity. Increase the specular just a little bit. We'll do Shift B and pull a box over here. So you can see we've sort of got a bright area of where our noise is. And let's see, turn the diffuse down, up, specularity down. Let's turn the specularity up, and let's also turn the emission up. And we're going to go into the texture settings for our lamp. So let's select visible layers up here and select our point lamp, and you can just click this F and this plus. We can just keep adjusting the contrast values in our texture until we get something a little bit more palatable. Starting to shape up the point value. You can select so that it doesn't affect this diffuse or the specular. So let's uncheck specular and go back to the plane. And let's make the plane's value a little bit higher. Alright, and go back to the point lamp. And we can check specular, we can check negative. And negative will just do the opposite and make certain parts darker if we make the energy a negative value. Alright, so now we'll change it to a blue texture. And we'll go to the plane and we'll make the plane dark blue. We'll make the specular color nice and dark blue. Alright, so now we've gone and created a nice dark blue background. So we can keep playing with the settings on this so we get a desired look. It's starting to shape up nicely. We can go to the point lamp and change the strength to -5. Hold down Shift and select your other layers, and it's time to render. So FN at 12. Let's go to the viewer node. Alright, so we're going to clear the render border, add in some glow effects to our text, and then we'll be done with this tutorial. So Control Alt B, and let's see. Now we've got our particles. Let's create a quick camera zoom out So let's fast forward to a frame, right click on the camera, type I and click location rotation, rewind, GZ, left click, and I, location rotation, and just play that through. And then you have a camera pan out with some particles and some metal text. So let's right click on our text. Let's move this plane back then, GZ, left click and scale it up, left click. And let's right click on our text, select all by type font, left click and move our text down. Actually size our text down because it's rather large. S, move that in, left click, move that up. Just scale into scale it and move it until it's palatable. And fast forward this through. Hit F and F12 to render this. And you can see our texture background. You can see our particles. Go into the viewer node. You can see our particles quite a bit actually. And what we'll do is we'll go into the compositor and we'll turn off some of the, we'll turn down some of the values for the particles. So we have this particle value is turned down here. Let's turn it down a little bit further. Alright, let's turn down some of the glow here. So let's just turn off the add for the glowing particles. See if that does it. Alright, so let's decrease the blur on our original particles. So we're just refining it until it gets a nice sleeker look. It's starting to shape up fairly nicely. So we've got our blurred up scene here. Where did the particle blurs go? Here we go. And you can turn that down to 5 and 5. So now we have a bit more defined particles, but they still have a nice blur. And what we'll do with our depth of field effect is we'll left click on this ellipse mask. We might have to turn the blur down just a bit because it's blurring down quite a bit. Or increase the width and the height. Use the middle mouse button to pan around. Alright, now for the final touches for this, we'll add in some glow for our text object. Add filter glare. And you can turn on fog glow. And change the quality to high and reduce the threshold to 0. Use the mouse button to pan around. So we've got a nice glow on our text. Let's change the threshold to 0.3 so that we get a subtle glow. And let's add color RGB curves. Put that to the glare. And give it a little bit of a blue tint. And lessen the red. So now we have a bluish metal text there. Go back into default view and you've got yourself a nice, pretty refined particle scene here. So again, you can adjust the settings on the particles in the background, and pretty much most of what's just been shown. So if you want to choose your render settings, I'm going to go into the render settings and you want to make sure the resolution is 100. Again, when you do that, you're going to jump back into the compositor and just possibly increase your blurs by just multiply them by 2. So you want to increase the X and Y values to 300 here for anything here, and you'll increase them for 60 for those. So you want to increase the blurs to match the resolution. And as always, you want to make sure you have the last node in your node setup hooked to the composite node, so that when you start to render, that everything you've this huge node setup here will actually plug into your video. So you want to make sure that works properly. So we'll reduce this back to 50% resolution, render this out, and we can use, let's see, MPEG 4, and make sure this is MPEG 4. But basically you want to use whatever is compatible with your media player. So whatever format you can use on your computer. So for our we've got Windows 10, so we use MPEG 4 with the default media player for that, and the MP3 for the audio codec. And as always, if you don't want to get the cannot open file for writing error with Blender, you want to click this folder and select the location on your computer for your animation to render to. So choose name for your animation, click accept, and you should be good. So again, you'll probably want to refine the particle animation and a few other effects to your taste, but for now it looks like this is shaping up to be a nice scene. So you can render that and see what you get. And again, you can check out a modified version of the project file in the description of this video, or by clicking the card to the top right of the screen here. So we're pretty much finished with this tutorial. So we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, leave a thumbs up below, maybe comment too. Check out our shop for some epic Blender kits, and totally check out the links in the description if you like these tutorials. Subscribe for more, and we'll see you guys in the next tutorial.